So, welcome to another episode. So, today we're talking about a topic or the topic of determinism. Now, there's always an argument, isn't there, whether we have free will or whether this is in fact an illusion, and whether determinism rather reigned supreme. As with the maybe one of the next few videos I'm going to make, there are different ways or definitions for determinism. This is the big problem for me when people argue points, especially in a metaphysical sense. Oh, my God wouldn't do that. Oh, my God, this. Oh, what you telling me you don't believe in God? Oh, I'm this, I'm that. Oh, obviously everything is determined. Oh, so you're saying I don't have a free choice, etc., etc., etc. A lot of the times we're arguing different points. The underlying definition or point that we are considering or arguing against has not been truly defined. That is a problem. So, from a deterministic perspective, I'm going to talk about what it is and the different types, and maybe you can try and understand where you fall in terms of your belief as to whether we have free will or not, essentially. So, determinism is defined as the proposition that every event, every decision, and every action is determined by a chain of prior occurrences. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have no influence on the future, which is, if you're going to be using that as an example, is fatalism, where we have literally nothing to do with what happens, it just happens. But it's saying that we have no influence over the future in some respects. So let's take this to a logical extreme. Determinism would argue that the initial Big Bang triggered every single action, every thought through cause and effect. So the Big Bang happened, and everything that followed on from that was a process of determinism. So you listening to this podcast today was part of that same deterministic outcome. So there are some complexities here to consider. There are different types of determinism. There is compatibilism and incompatibilism. So just think of it in a slightly different way. One is hard determinism, and one is soft determinism. Now, what does that mean? So, incompatibilism is that free will and determinism are incompatible with each other. If one exists, therefore the other cannot exist. If it's night, it can no, it cannot be day at the same time. If you're male, you cannot be female at the same time. Obviously, despite all of the crap that goes on these days. So, free will in this case is an illusion. Or maybe free will is true and it's incompatible with determinism. And maybe neither determinism nor free will is true because they can't be compatible. That's called pessimistic incompatibilism. If it's free will that you think is true, then it's libertarianism. On the flip side, and this is probably where most people will fit, um, not being sort of prejudging or presupposing anything here, but compatibilism is the belief that free will and determinism can be compatible in some respects. So free will is not the ability to choose as an agent independent of a prior cause, but instead as an agent who is not forced to make a certain choice. So William James came across or thought up the soft determinism part. But you can see that just because you believe something is determined or there are cause and effects, we do have choice along the way. The example I use here is someone who dies of an overdose. Surely they weren't determined to do that. There was yep, some cause and effects would have happened that led them down maybe the wrong path, but they always had a choice to go to the cash point, to smoke the drugs, inject the drugs, continue to go back and take the drugs. As we all know, we get them two voices in our head, don't we, when we do something? Yeah, one more beer in the back of our mind. No, you've got work tomorrow, you've got exercise to do. And for me, that's where this free will and determinism question arises from, because they're the choices that we are given. And obviously, Sam Harris says that we don't have free will, but that's maybe something different to consider in that respect. But there are many things here that can make sense. So, another way to think about it, so if we just go back to the Big Bang example, there is a way that you could set up a pool table or a billiard table or snooker table, hit the balls, and you could predict exactly where each ball would land. You could do that based on the spin of the white ball, how hard you hit the triangle of reds or colours, again, depending on the game you're playing. You can take into account the sponginess of the cushions, how big the table is, how clean the balls were, which ball you actually hit when you hit the triangle. You could calculate the amount of pressure that's lost or energy that's lost when the balls hit each other off the cushions. And you could predict where those balls land. Something that Newtonian physics talks about. Um, and as I said about the Big Bang side of things, are things happening predictably, and we are getting predictable results. So, types of determinism then. So we've talked about the types in terms of compatible or incompatible, but there are subsets of determinism. So casual determinism or nomological determinism, for another synonymous word, is the belief that future events are necessitated by past and present events combined with the laws of nature. So yeah, you can do A to get B, but it has to be within the realms of human nature. If you crash into someone, a car is more powerful than the human body, in which case there will be repercussions. If you hit a tennis ball against a wall, at a certain angle, it will bounce off at a different angle in line with the laws of nature. Therefore, all events have a cause and an effect. And the precise combination of these at a particular time, in a particular place, in a particular way, will result in a particular outcome. So that's causal determinism. You've then got biological determinism as well. This is where we say all behavior, beliefs, desires, all of that is made up from our genetic makeup and cannot be changed. I mean, is there some truth in that? Usain Bolt running the 100 meters in 9.5 seconds, give or take. Have you got the physical makeup to do that? Is there a case of maybe some soft determinism here, saying that you are given certain biological weapons to use at your disposal rather, but then you have the choice within that to decide what to do with your life. Some people have very high IQs. Some people are really, really tall. Some people are really, really athletic. Some people are obviously very, very handsome or beautiful. And it's up to you to decide what you're going to do with that. You've got environmental determinism, geographical determinism, essentially, that physical environment rather than social conditions determines culture. So will living on a beach determine things differently to if you were living in a city or in the mountains? If you're living in the mountains, you're more likely to be a mountain climber. If you live on the beach, are you more likely to be a surfer? If you live in the city, are you more likely to be a homeowner, as an example? These are the things to consider. This is an interesting one, and this is one I think that most people. So we said at the start, didn't we? When we argue, are we arguing the same point? I think theological determinism is one that most people will see as their underlying definition. So theological determinism is saying that there is a God who determines everything that humans will do, either by knowing their actions in advance because they're omniscient, or by decreeing their actions in advance. So again, I'll come back to the example of a crackhead overdosing. This argument of theological determinism would suggest that that person was made or born to die, whether they were literally God played the hand or he knew that would happen. In either case, I think that there has to be some level of choice involved there. And that's where maybe softism or soft determinism comes in. But again, everyone can make their own decision up as to what they think. But that's just something that I thought I'd share. And then you've got emergentism, says that free will does not exist. Although, you do have an illusion of free will, don't you? There's infinite variations of things, but there's an interaction in a finite situation, and there's rules and parameters. So is it just a case of there's loads of options, but there's no such thing as free will? If that makes sense. We've heard that before, haven't we? The illusion of free will. So we've obviously talked a bit so far about those types of determinist parts. Um, but the key question for me is which is right? Do we have determinism or not? If you think of a spectrum, you've got on one end free will, and the other end, some form of determinism or fatalism, in fact. The question is, where do you sit?